Hello everyone, welcome to another Inkarnate live stream. Today we're going to be creating deserts in our world maps using primarily the fantasy world style. We're going to be doing this video is just showing you where to put your deserts and how to put them together. So that's going to be really helpful. And the first thing, of course, is you're going to want to clone and edit this map. If you want to follow along in today's stream, if you're watching live, you'll find that in the chat. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll find that in the video description. So let's jump in. Now, with any map that you're working on, the first thing that you should do is make some rules. The rules are going to help you for setting scale, where to put biomes, climates, all those things like that. It doesn't really matter what map you're working on. It could be a world map, it could be a battle map, whatever. Rules help to make the process easier and quicker, right? Especially if you're perhaps trying to make some money selling your maps and you have time limits, then yes, having some rules will help to speed up that process. And of course, the first rule for any map is to set scale. And the way that you set scale is by turning on that grid. That's what's really helpful. And the grid's going to be helpful for any map that you're working on as well. So setting scale. And it doesn't really matter. Let's say that you're in the middle of working on a world map. Turn on that grid anyway and start setting a scale. And then that way you can go back and clean up any inconsistencies that you might have now that you've set the scale. So it doesn't matter where you're at. If you're following along on this map, turn that grid on. If you're following along with your own map, turn on that grid. And for the purpose of this, I'm just going to go with maybe each grid equals 250 square miles, or if you're using the metric, you can go kilometers. It doesn't matter, but you need to set a scale, whether it's imperial, metric, or your own measuring system that you've devised for your world. And once you've set that first rule, the next rule is to place down your climate zones. And by doing that, you'll kind of figure out where biomes will go. So let's just say that if you haven't already, maybe make this little guide, and you can also find this guide in the template here. So if you clone and edit this map, this guide is here. And you're going to start with your equator being in the center line, and then going up and down. You've got your tropics, your subtropics, your temperate, and your polar. Now that you know where each climate zone is, now it'll be easier to place the different types of deserts or forests or swamps or whatever it is that you're trying to make. So that's really helpful. It's also helpful that you have your mountains already placed down on your world map. And in fact, after you've set scale rule and you've set the rule for the climate, you should probably put down your mountains. And if you haven't done that yet, where you are in your current stage, hop on that now. And the reason why is because mountains are so large that they create their own weather. And that plays a huge role in where biomes are going to be placed. And that includes deserts. So throwing down your mountains is first, before you start putting down your biomes, is a great idea. So those are the three rules that we start with. And remember, this is fantasy. Rules are totally meant to be broken. Okay? It's fantasy. You can break rules. Just don't break them too much. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to start with different deserts, and there are about a dozen or so deserts, and I'm only going to be covering 4, which are the most common, the ones that you'll probably be using. I'm going to drop the opacity a little bit of the climate because I want to still be able to see it, but I also want to not get in the way of what I'm working on. So the first one is going to be interior deserts, and just like you would expect, it's called an interior desert because it's in the heart or in the center or the interior of your continent, meaning it's so far removed from large bodies of water like the ocean that moisture can't reach and collect and create precipitation. So it becomes a dry environment. Interior deserts can also have some mountains around them, but for the most part, what defines interior deserts is that they are in the central part of a continent, being so far removed from moisture. And I'm going to show you what I normally do when I make any kind of biome is I first like to take a path, and it doesn't matter whether you have a mouse or whether you have the path tool, or I'm sorry, a mouse or a pen. Drawing out your biome first with the path tool allows you to not have to paint in or place down stamps and then you don't like it and then you have to change it again. So instead, you can just use the path tool. And what's really nice too is that you can rotate it around. Maybe you don't like the shape of that desert. So you can go in and rotate it like this and put it there if you like, or if you want to rotate it back and put it here like this. Instead, you can do that. So that's the beauty of using the path tool, is it allows you to, in advance, kind of mark out the biome. Now I'm going to stick with the original shape that I had. And then once that shape is there, you can add in your texture or your stamps. Now there are multiple approaches to doing a biome. And the way that I'm going to go about it, I'm going to show you two methods. One is through stamps, or actually there's three methods. Stamps, using purely texture, or a mix between textures and stamps. So the first one is stamps. And the way that I go about this is I'm going to use the path tool again at a lower opacity to kind of create my ridges of where my dunes are going to be. And the way that I go about doing this is I'll just make like little, let's just say like a river or a little path. And this is where I'm going to place the dunes. Okay, and now what's one thing that's iconic to an interior desert is that the dunes can get really, really high. The sand, or where the dunes are, they can get really, really, really big in interior deserts. So choose carefully what stamp you want to use when you place them down, so that way, it's like if you have taller dunes, it'll fit more with the interior part. All right. So let's go ahead and pick some stamps, and I favorited a bunch. Whenever you are planning on using a lot of a stamp, select that stamp and then favorite immediately. And that's this little tiny save to favorites button right there. And if you click over to favorites, it'll take you to those favorited things. And that's a great way, because what generally happens is that you end up placing so many stamps that recently used, it doesn't show up in the recently used anymore. And that becomes a problem, because then you have to go back into the catalog and look for that stamp again. Don't do that. Favorite it right away, and then you can jump over to your favorites, and there they all are. Just what you need, right? Okay? So now what I'm going to do is I want to make sure that I set my scale. Now, when it comes to how big your dunes are, or how big, whatever stamp you're using, that's going to be all about two things. One, whether you want to stick to strict scale, which at that point you might want to use a texture, because it's so small. Really, the scale is so small that you probably wouldn't see individual dunes. But if you don't mind a scale discrepancy, if you don't mind that it's just for an artistic purpose, you just want it to artistically throw in dunes so that they're visible to see on the map, so it's more obvious that it's a desert, that's totally okay. And hey, welcome first time chatters, both of you. I'm so glad you're here. And yes, subscribe to the channel right now. We have hundreds of videos. Go check them out. There's so much to learn and to have fun with. So go check out the channel, okay? So now that I've done that, you need to choose the artistic approach or the hard line scale, and that's up to you. And since we're using stamps, we're going to break one of the rules, and we're going to go instead with artistic. And what I'll do is I'll place a stamp down, and I'll just drag it like this. Now these dunes right here are so large that you can actually just place them down like this. But the way that I go about it, in fact, I think that might even look better there. It spans the whole thing. The objective is just to make sure that the ridge of the stamps follows a particular pattern. So the ridge, that's the top of the dune, is all lined up. So what I can do is I can individually scroll through each one and just make sure that it's lined up. The ridges are lined up. And you notice here that I've done that. I'll show you here. We'll go ahead and remove this yellow one here. And I'm going to use a different path, and I'll show you where the ridges connect. And this way there's a continuity in the stamps, and it doesn't look like the dunes are just set at random. Dunes do have a ridge. They have a windward side and a leeward side and a shadow side. And so doing that's going to be really, really helpful. Let me go ahead and pull up a path here, and I'll show you where the ridges connect. Let's go down here. You'll notice here that the ridges along here, they connect, right? And by doing that, you kind of create this illusion of dunes are in kind of in a more natural formation, and they're kind of lined up together. That's a great question, by the way, Rimfire. Go check out the channel for other videos. Okay, now that you've done that, it's not too complex. Now you can go in and you can take your dunes and you can start placing them where you feel best. Now, one thing I want to mention about the dune that I'm using is that these have a clipping mask. And a clipping mask is basically like a portable FG layer, or you could say it's synonymous with the add mode of the mask tool. But what that clipping mask will do is pick up whatever texture is on the FG layer. These are really useful for blending. So if you are finding that your whatever ground texture you're using isn't blending very well with a stamp, use a stamp with a clipping mask, or option B, you can use the luminosity blend mode. That requires a little bit more tweaking, and we will cover that in our next one. So let's keep placing down kind of dunes here. Let's make sure I'm kind of placing them again in a way where you can kind of see where they're putting together. Let's do one more. Let's put it right. I'm just going to make sure that they're lined up properly. That looks fine. And then you can just keep doing it on the next one. Now these are, again, a little big, but that's okay. We're just trying to show that this is a desert, because if you were going with a little bit more rigid, stuck to scale, you wouldn't see these dunes at all. Instead, what you would see is just a yellowish kind of or orangish color. That's it. And if you want something more out of your biomes, you want to show a little bit more of the stamp, it's okay to step away from scale or just use a texture. And it's really all about a couple things: your time constraint, whether you're going for the artistic or super realism, or as real as you can get, obviously, with a map maker. And then just, the artistic choices that you want to make. Let's go ahead and select all these and bring the scale down. And what you can do is you can select one dune and then click the hamburger menu and say select all stamps from this set. And that way you'll have them all selected and you won't accidentally select something else. And you can just change the size to any size that you want. So if you really want them to be smaller, you can totally do that. Just bring the scale down, right? That's not hard. And then you can go in and put in more dunes in certain areas if you want. Maybe you want to put a couple up here. That's up to you, right? And then you've got that. Now, once you've finished that, you can delete all your paths, or actually let's keep the outline because I want to actually paint in that. So the next step, once you've placed down your stamps and you've used this method, now you want to pick a texture that you want to use, right? And because the stamps are doing the dunes for you, it's probably best to use a stamp or a texture that doesn't have any dunes built into that. So use a desert texture that doesn't have dunes kind of drawn into the texture, because it will kind of contradict or kind of clash with the stamp dunes that you have. So again, just my suggestion, that's the way I go about it. And just go in and fill it in. We're going to go in like this and just fill it in. And we'll talk about blending biomes as well. Don't worry, we'll get to that. Blending is so much easier than you think. First, just fill in the shape where the path tool is. That's step one. Let's just get that. So those dunes, that's up. Now you can remove the path. You don't need it anymore. Next is the blending stage. How do you go about blending? That's not difficult. What you want is you want to favorite the two textures that you have, which is this brown texture right here, which is where the brown is against this desert color, and then you favorite that. Once you've done that, now you need to diffuse the lines that define the biome. So you'll see here that there is this here, and it's not diffused very well. It's kind of a soft line there, and you want to diffuse that line. And the way that you diffuse is by doing little dots of both textures at a lower opacity. So what I would do is I would choose this desert texture. I'm going to bring the size way down. You can just hold down the shift key and use your mouse scroll wheel. And you're going to change the opacity. You want to bring it down too. And what we'll do is I'm going to just do some quick single clicks like this with either your pen or your mouse. And we're going to, like I said, diffuse that line. We're going to break it up. So I go in here like this, and you'll notice that the line is kind of breaking up a bit. And wherever you see a line, then just click with that desert texture. And what you're doing is you're just, again, diffusing that line. And that's how easy that it is. You can just do that. So let's go, keep diffusing the line, and then we'll move on to the next type of desert, and we'll go with a different style of using stamps. I'll show you about luminosity blend modes as well. Okay, all right, we're almost done diffusing this. Remember, just little dots. That's really as simple as it is. And if you want more detail, you can also just select the brown one and then go in like this. And you'll notice that you're just diffusing it even more. If you're not satisfied, you feel like the biome just isn't very well blended into the surrounding biomes, that's fine. Take whatever that biome texture is, go in and single click and kind of get that in. So see how easy it is to blend in those textures. It's not too hard. So blending just two textures, drop the opacity, little dots. It's called diffusing. Now I'm at 445 changes. That's quite a bit. I am going to go ahead and save this. And the next one that we're going to be covering is a rain shadow desert. And a rain shadow is basically where tall mountains are blocking moisture from getting to a certain area because the mountains are so tall. So one thing you want to keep in mind is that if you want to create a rain shadow desert, you need a very tall mountain range next to it so that way moisture cannot build up enough to create precipitation in that area. So that's called, again, a rain shadow desert, and we are absolutely going to make that, and I'll show you how. And while it's saving, I'll cover the other deserts as well because it's taking a little while to save here. We're also going to be covering coastal deserts, which I know people are like, wait, there's a desert by the ocean? Absolutely, and I'll be showing you how to do those. And then lastly, we'll be showing you cold deserts, and we're going to be throwing in the various methods. Again, in the coastal one, we'll put down stamps and we'll use blend modes, and then we'll also do cold deserts, and we'll use probably some textures. Okay, it's probably taking so long because I am recording, I'm streaming. That's probably why. Okay, all right, so first desert done. Okay, it's just as simple as just finding where it's located, and that's why we have these, the climate zones here, and then we also have the mountains up, and we have scale to all help us out. So let's talk about a rain shadow desert. Okay. All right. So a rain shadow desert, again, like I mentioned while we were saving, is located next to a very tall mountain range. So moisture, it has a difficult time getting to that particular landmass, and they're not creating precipitation. So a rain shadow, again, just tall mountains. And you can put a rain shadow desert just about anywhere. It can be in the subtropics. The most of the time you're going to find these is going to be in your subtropics and your tropics. You're not going to find a lot of those in your temperate zones, though you can place them there. That's up to you. But sticking within your temperates or staying within your subtropics and not really deviating away from that, that's where you find a lot of your rain shadow. And when it comes to your interior, you're likely going to find them really on any landmass. It's just that it must be in the heart of the landmass, okay? All right, so rain shadow. Now for this one, I am going to go ahead and open up this group. If you're not familiar, by the way, on how to operate these little guides, when you're cloning a map and you go into that right panel there, you'll notice that I have everything labeled and organized in the object panel on the right, and that's going to be really, really helpful. And some things will be set to a 0 opacity. So if you're confused, all you need to do is just click it and then just click the opacity set to 1 or 100, okay? So if you're ever confused on how a lot of these little templates that I make work, it's all grouped guides. They are in the object panel. You'll need to turn them on and off by using opacity slider bar. when they're selected, okay? I know that I haven't really explained that in the past, and I want to make sure that I make it clear. That is how you operate these things. So let's do a rain shadow desert. And I'm going to remove the text, but I'm going to keep that path there because I know where it is. Let's go into those favorites, and I'll put down another dune set. And just like before, you can have them snaking through, or you can place them randomly. It's up to you. If you can look up how dunes are formed. There's a lot of different formations of dunes. So, and I don't want to go into that. That's a lot, but we don't have to follow the same method of creating ridges. You can clearly place them randomly as well. And we can also bring the size down. These are rather large. So I'll bring them way down. Let's bring the scale down. There we go. Let's go with a little bit closer to scale. And I'm just going to place them in groups too. Like I'll have basically some dunes are clustered together, which kind of shows a little ridge. And then I'll have a couple dunes that are kind of rando away from each other. And in this way, I kind of have a different dune formation. Let's say that you have multiple deserts. It's nice to have various dune formations. Okay. Now, one thing you're going to notice is that the texture that the stamp doesn't work with the current texture. So let's try using that same texture I used earlier on the other biome, and we'll see how well that sand texture works. Well, let's make sure the opacity is all the way up too, right? So let's do that. Now, if you find that the texture, whatever texture you're using isn't working, you have a couple options. The first thing you can do is you can totally change whatever texture that you want to use. That's up to you. Or you can change the luminosity blend mode. Change the blend mode. So if I say I select this stamp here, select all from this set, change that blend mode to luminosity, and you'll notice that it picks up the same color. Now, if you feel like the line work is a little too dark and you want it to blend in better, you can change that contrast and change the brightness a little bit, and you can have the dune kind of match in more by kind of diminishing the contrast a bit, so the line work's not so thick. So this way, you're actually forcing the stamp to conform to the texture instead of forcing the texture to conform to the stamp. Okay, so that is how you about going that. And now once you've done that, of course, make sure that you favorite it. Make sure you add this to your favorites, because I have changed it. Like if I click this right here and I open it up, I'm going to scroll upward. Let's see, here we go. Let's go to stamp here. Here we go. Let's make sure that I have the right properties. Change it to luminosity, and then favorite that right away. Because if you don't favorite that stamp and the properties that you've added, the luminosity, the contrast, the brightness, and those settings, what will end up happening is that you'll have to redo them all over again like I just did. You saw my whoops. So favoriting them, make sure that they're there. So now you can go in and put in smaller dunes. What's really nice is a variety of size. Once you've thrown in some big dunes, drop the scale down and throw in some smaller dunes to get some variety in there. And that ends up giving it a more natural feel to it, because there is a lot of variety in dunes, shapes and sizes. So if you use the same shape or the same size for every stamp, it's going to end up looking a little, I don't know, unnatural. So dropping the scale just 10 down 10. So if you're set to 10, go 20. If you're set to 20, go 10 and 30. So go in between those. So showing various size really helps a lot, okay? All right, now that we've done that one, I can open up the rain shadow and delete that path. And just like before, you would just diffuse that edge with that texture. And I'm not gonna do it now because I already demoed it to you in the previous one. So let's go into another type of desert. We're running out of time now, so I want to quickly wrap this up. I don't want to take too long. Let's talk about coastal deserts. Okay, now yes, deserts can be on the coast, but there are a couple requirements. There's a couple rules that are required for that to work. The first one is that the ocean that it's on must be large. It's very big. And a part of that, because it's cold, right? The larger the ocean, the deeper it is, the colder it is. So with a desert, with an ocean that's super cold, it doesn't get warm enough for a lot of precipitation to form. So you're not going to have a lot of moisture. There's also a You'll also notice that there is a mountain range on that other side of the coast. So that's also blocking any moisture that might come from the other ocean. So basically what you've got is a large ocean that's super deep and therefore very cold, not allowing for a lot of moisture to build up, and a mountain range to the side. The mountain range is not required, but I throw it in there just to kind of give it a little bit more realism to it, because you could totally find mountains next to a coastal desert. And by the way, if any of you guys ever, if you ever have a hard time with kind of figuring out where deserts are, just follow that kind of guide, okay? Sorry about that, I went off track. All right, let's talk about coastal deserts. And this time, we're gonna be using textures only, by the way. So I'll delete that text there, and we're gonna be using a texture. And now, with this, I'm using textures from a different style. So I'm kind of deviating a little bit from Fantasy World, because Fantasy World doesn't have the dune shaped texture, and that's for a good reason. It's because it's at a different scale. You probably wouldn't find those dune textures in the world. You probably find it in a different style. So I favored it already. And one of the things I want to mention is that you are going to want to scale down a texture. So let me go to advanced settings and see what happens when I bring the scale up. You see how big those dunes were? Whenever you're changing your scale, or whenever you're using scale, you always have to factor in its scale. So let's scale it down quite a bit. And I'm also going to rotate it, because you'll notice the dunes have a shadow built into them. So what you want to do is that to keep continuity with the light and shadow already on the map, you'll see that the shadows are actually on the right side of the mountains. So then it's fair to assume that the dunes should also have the shadows on the right side. Okay, and I'm actually going to rotate it to the point where they're a little offset from that, because I think it's really weird when you place things perfectly at a 90. It looks a little odd, because I don't really see that on a map. So rotating it or offsetting it just a little bit will give it a little bit more flavor. So now I can go in with that texture and just apply it here. And what you have now is a more texture-oriented desert instead of your stamp-oriented. And this is all really up to you and your artistic choices that you feel is best for your map. And if you're having a hard time with knowing whether to use textures, really it's scale. Scale will determine really what kind of texture you want to use. So you'll see there that I have some dunes there, and it follows with the shadow of the mountains fairly well, and it just looks different, right? You see there's quite a difference between using a stamp, which you see on the right side, on the left side when you're using a texture. All right, let's do that last one, because we are running short on time. The last one is called a polar desert. Okay, and I know that sounds weird, like, is there such a thing as a desert in the polar regions? Absolutely. They're also referred to as cold deserts. And I'm going to go ahead and remove that line 2 from this desert there. Perfect. And a polar desert, as you would expect it, is going to be found in your polar regions, whether it's north or south. It doesn't matter. And what defines a cold desert is it's mostly going to be bedrock, and it's going to be dirt, and it's going to be frigid, and it's going to be very, very cold. And you could say that they're similar to a tundra if you'd like, but a polar desert is totally real, and we're going to show you how to put those together. So I've built my shape. Remember the rules. Build the outline first with the path tool, and then you can decide what texture you want to use. So let's go ahead and remove this. And normally they're going to be found within your 60 and 90 degrees longitude. That's going to be your polar regions, basically, if you're following Earth logic. And we're totally using kind of Earth. We're using Earth physics here because it's just easier to work with. But if you're a very creative person and that's one of your things, you love to come up with your own climate zones and your own everything, that's fine too. But just remember to have the rules there, so that way you know where to place biomes. So with this one, we're going to go with more a cold, desert-y feel to it. There's not a lot of dunes in this, so instead you want to go with a snowy like texture. And you can use whatever you want. You could use this land white texture from the Fantasy World style. You could use any one of these ice and snow textures if you want. I'm going to use this one right here, this snowy one. I kind of like it. And I'm just going to place it here, right on top here. And I didn't scale it down because I think it works fine at this scale, but you could totally change the scale. Just apply it first and just discover if it needs the scale. And one thing that you can do is you can put mountains around it to give it a little bit more dramatic feeling to it. There aren't really any dunes in a cold desert, but if you wanted to, you could totally add them. That's up to you. It's a fantasy thing. A cold desert could be a frigid wasteland that is made of dunes of snow instead of dunes made of sand. And you could use that same dune texture. Just go to your color options in your advanced settings and change the saturation. And I'm going to bring the brightness up a little bit, and I'll change the size too. That way it's a little bit smaller. And now that I've removed the color, I've made it white. When I apply it, it will have that kind of duney feel to it. And if it's still a little too dark, just go to your color, bring the brightness up quite a bit. There you go. And then you have a cold desert. So it's really up to you. You just need to set those rules first, and you need to make decisions about whether you want pure function, pure rules, or if you want to break some rules and add in some scale indiscrepancies by throwing in the dunes. Because at this scale, really, if you're looking at this map from this kind of a scale, you would never see those dunes. So it is a stylistic choice that you, as an artist, as a map maker, need to decide how to put together. And I didn't mention how these are formed. Really, it's just very strange atmospheric changes. Usually the water is very, very cold. And because it's so frigid, a lot of moisture can't be created because you need heat for moisture to be created. Heat, cold air and warm air need to coalesce to create cloud formations, to create precipitation. So in a very polar region, there's not a lot of precipitation because it's so cold, it can't get warm enough to create cloud formations. So that's where cold deserts are going to be. They're going to be in the polar region. You could have them bleed over into the temperate zone a little bit if you want. It's up to you. You could change the texture on that a little bit to make it maybe a different texture. We can go to recently used over here and just use this texture instead, and just say that because this biome is a bit different, we can just throw in this texture here if you want, and that way it looks a little bit different. It might look strange with the line, with a straight line, so just make sure that you diffuse the two textures, right? So that way you'll see that some of this desert is in a temperate zone and its environment has changed a bit. Okay, that's how you kind of diffuse those lines between the two biomes, even though this is one biome, but they're in two different climate zones. So make sure that you kind of show that. You zoom in and you'll notice that the dunes kind of fade away here, and it kind of goes into a more bedrocky kind of feel to it instead. That's really up to you, and you know now how to diffuse. All right, well, hey, that is it. Really, for deserts, there's a lot more. Go research for yourself, but these are the four most, I think, most common ones. If you want me to show the other desert as well, please let me know. I'll go ahead and I will be sure to do the other deserts as well. I noticed that world map videos that pertain to world maps are the most popular on our channel, so I'm focusing a lot this month on focusing on biomes, focusing on videos that focus on world maps. In the next one, I think it's swamps, and we're probably just going to use this same map right here. We're just going to place swamps on them. If you like this format, let me know in the chat, or let me know on YouTube in the comments, because I'm always trying to find the best format that works well for you viewers and what's going to be the most useful, okay? Because I am totally prone to suggestion, and I'm totally willing to help you, because that's the point of these videos, is to make sure that making maps is easy and it's fun for you, because I know how frustrating it is when you're working on a map and it doesn't go your way. So follow those rules. Rules are meant to be broken. It's fantasy, and it will help you to make your maps. All right. Hey, thanks everybody. I'll see you all next week. I think it's next week. We're going to be doing swamps, and we'll be doing the same thing. Thank you all for being here. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and I will see you all in a week. Auf Wiedersehen and merry map making, my friends.